Hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be here and talk to you about mobile application. That's my passion. That's what I do every day. So I'm very glad to talk to you about this. And big thank you to the family for hosting this kind of workshop. Okay, so why are we here today? I like to start with this figure, 80%. And that's the reason why I'm here today. This figure is the number of the percentage of applications that are used only once on a mobile device, meaning an application that is downloaded and used once or even 0 times on a mobile application. Okay? So what this figure means, this figure is very big, 80%, that's really huge. It means that really only 20% of the users who download an application will use it several times. Okay, and this means that basically developing application that people want to use many times is a very difficult task. Okay, and what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and give you some hints and some rules about how to be among the 20% of the successful application that keep their users in the app. So first, I'd like to introduce you quickly my company. So I co-founded a company called Lunabee Studio. We are an app development studio, and what we do is we do apps in the Alps. And maybe I'll come back a little bit later on that point. What differentiates us from the other studio is that we don't only develop applications for other people, for our customers, but we also develop apps for ourselves. And we started developing apps for ourselves. And I'd like to quickly introduce you our application, our most successful application, which is called OneSafe. It's a password manager. Today we have about 2.5 million users. And when we started developing OneSafe, that was 6 years ago, a password manager. So for those who don't know, a password manager is a software where you can store securely all your passwords so that you can keep different passwords for all the different services that you use online. And in terms of digital security, it's much better than having the same password for all services, which is what many people do because you can't remember many passwords. So 6 years ago, when we started to develop this password manager, it looked like that. So as you can see, it was really not sexy at all. And the problem of the passwords was really not a sexy problem. And what we did 6 years ago is we came up with a solution that looked like that. And that was much more sexier. And we had really an incredible feedback from our users who were saying, wow, your application is the most beautiful application I have on my iPad, is the most beautiful application I have on my iPhone. And we felt very happy about this because we tried to tackle a very non-sexy problem and we came up with a very sexy solution. So going on, we tried to understand what makes an app sexy and what makes a great user experience in a mobile application. And we came up with 7 rules, which I talked about here a few months ago. That was in February. You can go on YouTube, there's a video. And if I go quickly over those 7 rules, the first one is an application should always be responding to the user, and especially the scroll gesture, which is a very common gesture that we all do all the time on a mobile device. And it's very important that your application and all its screens respond to this very natural gesture. The second rule, and this is the one we are going to talk about today, is do native application. Don't do hybrid application. And we'll go on this subject. First rule is really to avoid interruption. When you onboard a user in your application, you really want to reduce the frictions to the minimum, and you really don't want to interrupt your users. You want the first experience to be really seamless, to be really smooth. Okay. 4 rule is push can be the default, so don't overuse notifications and push notifications because that really degrades the user experience. Then prototype custom animations with Keynote. Using Keynote, we use really extensively Keynote when we design and when we create an application. 6 is when you create applications for your app, if too many pixels are moving on the screen, it means that the animation is probably too complex, and that's a typical developer tendency to create animations that move everywhere, that will create a wow effect to the user, but that's really not often the good way to do. Try to keep it simple, and in that same spirit, too many words on a screen, it means that it's probably too complicated as well. So those are the 7 rules. You'll go on YouTube if you want to learn more about that. But today we are going to focus on native applications, not hybrid application, and I'm going to explain you and try to convince you why hybrids technologies are not really the best you can use to develop applications. So first of all, how many of you are app developer? Wow. Okay, and how many of you develop native applications? Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna try to change your mind today. Hopefully I can. Otherwise it's gonna be a very interesting debate anyway, so let's go. So first, I'd like to take a quick step back and to tell you about what are the drivers for us to choose a technology over another one. And there are basically 3 drivers for us to choose a technology. The first one is for the end users of the application. We really want to create a super user experience, a really smooth user experience, and the most efficient user experience possible. Okay, and that's the first point. Obviously, I think no one will disagree on this. Then, what's important too is we want for our developers to really feel good and to work using a great environment, so a great programming environment, but also great environment in general. So hence why we do apps in the Alps. And we really feel that this is a great environment to develop and to create applications. And first and third point, for the apps we develop, obviously we want them to be downloaded, we want them to be used by our users, and we want them to be featured on the stores. Okay? And for those 3 reasons, we decided to go for native applications only and not hybrid application. Now we are going to try and to go deeper into these points and see why we decided to go for native applications. So first, what do I mean by hybrid applications? So I guess all of you guys know about hybrid applications, or at least most of you, because most of you are developers. Just a quick reminder. To develop a mobile application today, you have basically the choice between 4 big kinds of technologies. The first one is you can develop native applications. Then you can use what we call code generation tools, such as Xamarin or React Native. Maybe some of you use those technologies. Or you can use also hybrid technologies, such as PhoneGap, Ionic, or Cordova. And the last one is you can just basically develop a responsive website, and this will do as well. And what I really often hear from people who do hybrid application is that with one stone, basically you kill 2 birds. Okay, so you write once source code, and then your app will run on both platforms, iOS and Android. Yeah, I won't almost talk about the other platforms because we know that the market is like very, very small, and so it's really about one stone killing 2 birds, Android, iOS. And every time I hear this, I think about my father's coffee machine. So this is my father's coffee machine. And every time he tells me, yeah, but you know, this coffee machine is really great because you can have either espresso coffee or brewed coffee. One machine, 2 different kinds of coffee, and that feels very good. But at the end of the day, when I try to use this coffee machine for real, so it's the morning, I'm not really awake, and I try to come up with I try to make my coffee. So as I'm a developer, I drink a lot of coffee, and obviously I drink coffee in big mugs. And when I arrive with my mug, this is what happens. Boom. I really can't make my espresso coffee using this machine because it's too small. It doesn't fit within the machine. Okay, so I try to bend the cup and try to block it against the percolator, but with the vibration, the cup will fall and so on, and it will spill all the coffee. And that's typically the experience I get with using this coffee machine. So I decide to go for the brewed coffee, and then when I use my mug and this brewed coffee machine that usually allow me to make a large amount of coffee at once, then I realize that the well, I don't know how you tell this or you say this in English, but you know, there's not enough coffee basically to fill in my cup or to fill in my cup several times. So once again, the experience is not very good using this machine. So I hope you understand what I mean by that. Is this coffee machine that's supposed to solve two problems at once with one machine only, at the end of the day, it doesn't work for either of these problems, for none of these problems. Okay. Those are the coffee machines we have at Lunabee Studio. So we have basically two different machines for two different usage, and I think that's much better. So okay, this being said, let's go into our matter today. So native versus hybrid, and let's go through several points why I feel native is much better than hybrid. So first point is that native application will allow you to create much better user experiences for your users. And I'd like to talk to you about another talk which I saw at the last DroidCon about performance with regards to user experience. This is a talk from someone called Mathieu Hauser. He's a very senior Android developer. And what happened to Mathieu is he stumbled upon this article on Medium just before the DroidCon that was about mobile application performance. And it was basically comparing performances of hybrid frameworks against the native Java Android framework. And this article was basically saying that hybrid applications are almost as performant as native applications. So as he felt that this was false and he strongly disagreed with this, he wanted to experiment it by himself and really run some tests and see how it is going on. Basically, this article was comparing different technologies on very computation-intensive tasks. It was really about comparing geolocation and so on. So it was really not about the graphical interface. And that was the reason why he didn't really believe in this article. So what he did is he used a feature that all Android phones have. Using the developer option, you can, for any screen, for any application, monitor the activity of the GPU and see if your application is behaving properly, see if your application is lagging or not lagging. The way it works is it shows you bars that represent the time that is needed to render every frame of your application. And then it works just like for movies. If you manage to render enough frames per second, then your app feels smooth. If you don't manage, so that's what represents the green mark. The green mark is basically 16 milliseconds, which correspond to 60 frames per second. And if you manage to stay within that range, then your app will feel very smooth. And to the contrary, if rendering a frame is very, very slow, then it will take a lot of time, and you will feel that the app is lagging. So he went on with this test, and he started to develop a very basic test application that was basically a list, okay, with 10,000 cells in it, and started to scroll this list, okay. So on Android, that's the first video. If you scroll the list, as you can see, the rendering of the frames remain below this 16 millisecond mark, and everything looks and feels very smooth. Okay. And then he did the same using Ionic framework. And what happened is actually it didn't work. He couldn't open an application with 10,000 cells, just a list with 10,000 cells using Ionic framework. So he had to reduce this number to 1,000 cells. And when you reduce this to 1,000 cells, this is what happens when it runs. Boom, there's a big lag at the beginning to load the list, okay? And then when you scroll, it's not very smooth. So he did this on Ionic, and finally he did the same on React. And on React, you can feel that this is quite smooth when you scroll the list, okay? But however, the framework is kind of cheating, okay? Because it actually doesn't load all the cells, okay? So when you scroll very quickly over the list, it's not very nice user experience, as basically all the rows are not loaded. So my point here is your users really expect a very smooth and very fluid interface. And it's very difficult to, already using native technologies is sometimes very difficult to reach this 16 millisecond mark and to make sure your app is very smooth. But using hybrid technologies, it's even more difficult to do this. Then I'd like to discuss quickly about OS guidelines. And so basically, Google and Apple on Android and on iOS provide many graphical guidelines, and there are many codes that are used across the operating system so that user will feel really comfortable using application, because they can find in all applications the same buttons, the same behaviors, the same kind of navigation, the same, and that's very useful, and that's very important, because that will make your user feel very comfortable when they open your app for the first time. And that's the first time they open your app within this first time they open your app, you need to convince them that they have to open it again and again and again. Okay, so they have to feel really at home when they open your app. So they basically provide a very big, very comprehensive framework for you to model all the different interfaces in your app. So that's the same on iOS. You can find pretty much the same. And my point here is that those frameworks are very different. And those are two screens of the same, that respond to the same feature, which is I want to create an event in my calendar. And just to tell you that, can you imagine, for those who have an iPhone, can you imagine creating an event in your calendar using this kind of interface? You would feel very confused. And it goes the same way for people who use Android all the time. And if they would have this kind of screen on their Android phone, they will feel also very confused. So the two frameworks are very different. The way you navigate through the application is very different. So when you use hybrid technology, it's very difficult to model this kind of behavior. And this usually costs a lot of time, a lot of additional time when you develop, compared to developing one Android and one iOS application. Just a quick story about this. When we released our OneSafe application, we released it first on iOS, and then we thought like, okay, we must have an Android application. So we hired a very senior Java developer, and we gave him the application on iOS, and we said, okay, can you do the same on Android? And this guy spent a lot of time trying to trying to mimic the iOS framework on Android. And at the end of the day, after many months and many hours of development, we just realized that it doesn't work. It just doesn't work because the frameworks are very different, and the way you model things and you navigate within the application has to be very different. So your user really want to feel at home, and they really want to basically to find their way easily within your applications. And maybe to go a little bit, to insist on this point, I'd like to remind you of what Mark Zuckerberg said back in 2012. He basically said that they spent at the beginning for the Facebook platform, they really bet on hybrid technologies, and they really wanted to develop their Facebook application using HTML5 and hybrid technologies. And they did this. And finally, to realize 2 years after that it just didn't work. And the quality of the app they were able to produce was not up to the level of their users' expectation, and was not up to the level of what they wanted for their application. And basically what he said is, we burned 2 years, and that's very painful. And in fact, when you're Facebook and you burn 2 years, that's very, very painful. Okay, then, so this was with regards to the user experience. Then, with regards to technologies, using native technologies will allow you to better leverage and to leverage faster the latest technologies. And that's very, very important. So just to give you a few examples of what has just been released by Google and Apple, you will see that really it gives you an edge on the competition when you use native technologies. So first example is what Android announced, what Google announced during the latest Google I/O. So I'm not sure if you guys seen this. This is what they call instant app. And basically what instant apps are is you browse the web, you see a link, you click on the link, and it opens not another web page. When you click on the link, it directly opens an application, a piece of application that runs natively on your phone. And can you imagine how powerful this is? You can provide really amazing user experience within an application when someone browses the web. So no need for going on the store, download the application, and run many marketing campaigns to acquire new users and so on. You can do this directly on the web. And that's one of the new features that introduced very recently. And obviously, if you want to use this kind of feature and have the edge on your competition, you have to go for a native application. Another example is SiriKit that Apple just introduced during the latest WWDC. By the way, if you don't know, you have to say WWDC. I just learned it this year. Because you know WWDC is really a pain to pronounce. So all the guys who go to the WWDC, so the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference, will say dub. So if you meet someone in the street who say dub, it means that he was probably in the latest WWDC. So SiriKit, what is this? It's the capability to integrate your application using Siri. You know Siri, the new interface from Apple, and that's another feature which is really great. So let's take an example. You are Lyft. You want your user to book a cab very easily. So what you do is you can integrate this with Siri so that you tell your phone, hey, I need a Lyft right now to go to the family, and boom, the application is directly triggered from Siri and come up like that. And this is obviously possible only using hybrid technologies. Another example is Map. Apple opened their Map framework so that you can integrate application directly within Map. So you look for a restaurant, you see a restaurant around you, you want to book a table, boom, you can use directly Open Table application to book directly within Maps. And finally, a third innovation that Apple just introduced is the iMessage with plus apps. So you can integrate application directly within iMessage. So you want to take a picture, you want to pay something, there are many possibilities. You can directly integrate your apps within iMessage. And at the end of the day, what is this is just, what does this mean? It means that the operating system and your applications are more and more intertwined. They are more and more integrated together, and they can do very, very powerful stuff doing so. And this, once again, obviously, is possible only if you use native application. With hybrid frameworks, this is not possible at all. Or maybe it will be possible, but within 1 or 2 years, and many, many things can happen within 1 or 2 years. My third point about native versus hybrid is about development environment. So we really feel that using native technologies, you really have better development environment. So I don't know if many of you use Android Studio or Xcode, but those tools are really, really powerful. And they keep evolving really fast, and they keep adding new and new features. So in Android Studio, I don't know if you've seen this, they introduced a new layout model, a new way of designing your applications, which is very, very powerful, which has just been released. Another point on Android Studio is, I mean, most of you are developer, you know that one of the most important feature in a development environment is code completion, right? And I can tell you, code completion on Android Studio is really amazing, really amazing. You cannot find anywhere else such a powerful and smart code completion. And that will save you a lot of time when you develop application. Similarly, Xcode becomes more and more powerful. One of the latest features they introduced is the fact that you can see side by side your screen. When you split the screen, you know, they introduced this feature that you can split your iPhone or iPad screens within two different apps. You can really see what your app will look like very easily using those kind of tools, using Xcode. And then, the whole environment anyway is very powerful, and they evolve very fast because Google and Apple both are really considering developing those environments a very high priority. So they do anything they can to make sure they are really great to use. Last point about Cordova. Recently, I saw this Stack Overflow survey. So that is about technologies and what are the most loved, the most dreaded, and the most wanted technologies. And I was very surprised that Cordova made it to the list of the most dreaded technologies. Actually, almost 70% of the developers who do Cordova say that they actually don't want to do Cordova anymore. And that's not surprising for a technology such as Objective-C, which has been replaced by Swift. But for a relatively new technology such as Cordova, it feels kind of surprising. Still about Cordova, we met recently, so at the WWDC we met a CTO of a big development company in France, and the guy was saying that when you develop a hybrid application, at first you can feel that you saved a little bit of time, but then the maintenance is really a nightmare. Because every time a new OS version is released, then maintaining and make sure your app is still compatible with those new versions, this is really a nightmare. And there are actually companies in India who specialize in maintaining and upgrading your apps every time a new version of an OS is released. So the cost at first here is really, and that's what he said, this is really the top part of the iceberg. But there is a big hidden part of the iceberg when you develop a hybrid application, which is then later what happens. And finally, when you talk about application, at the end of the day, you want your application to be downloaded, right? And you want your application to be used. And so with OneSafe, as we released the first version in 2011, we had quite some time to test many different ways to advertise your application. So we ran Facebook campaign, we ran AdWords campaign, we managed to get reviews on blogs and so on and so on. So we did many, many things to promote our application and to make sure it's downloaded. And I can tell you there is by far a way to promote your application that is much more efficient than all the other ways. And that way is being here, typically to be on the selection of the App Store on iTunes, to be featured basically by Apple or by Google. And that's by far, but when I say by far, it's like 1,000 times more efficient. It's by far much more efficient than all the other ways. So we had the chance to be featured like many times by Apple. So we have been selected on the App Store. We've been pick of the week. So in the Starbucks application, they do this in the US. They pick an app every week that you can download for free when you go to Starbucks. We have been free app of the week selected by Apple as well. So one week during 1 week, your app is free and featured, and users can download it. And I can tell you this generates a huge number of downloads. And my point here is very simple. If you go for a hybrid application, you will never, ever be featured like that. That's as simple as that. Because Apple or Google will always try to feature applications that basically make a very good use of their technologies and not on the competition competition. So that was my last point about native versus hybrid. So if I try to summarize, native applications, I mean, the reason why we only go for native applications is because native application will provide you with a better performance, will provide your users with a better user interface, will allow you to better leverage the latest technologies. You will have better development environment. And last but not least, you will have a much better visibility for your apps because you will manage to get featured by Apple or by Google. And that's it. So thank you for listening, and I'm very happy to discuss those points with you. Thank you.
Hello. Despite what you quoted Mark Zuckerberg as saying regarding time wasted, Facebook seems to be betting a lot on React Native. So what are we to make of this? I mean, React Native is hybrid.
Yes.
So, and they're developing it,
yeah.
putting all their weight in it.
Yeah.
So it can't be a bad thing.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so the question is, if Facebook doesn't like hybrid, why do they develop React Native,
Exactly.
right? That's the question. Well, and okay, my point is not about. I'm not telling you that in the future, developing hybrid application will be a mistake, and I'm not telling you that 2 years down the road we won't develop a hybrid application. What I'm trying to tell you today is, today we think that if you look at native and hybrid technologies, and if you want to develop your application, it's much better to go for native technologies. And what I believe Facebook is betting on when they develop this React Native framework is they're betting on the future. And maybe in the future, React Native will be actually better than native technologies. I don't know about this, and I don't want to be honest, I have no idea, because Google and Apple will obviously counterattack and come up with new features and new technologies that also will improve their own framework.
Now you just don't care. Any PC application runs on 3 platforms, and there is one source code. So maybe history will repeat itself with mobile, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
Because
or maybe not.
because it used to be a nightmare on the PC, and now that's trivial. And
yeah, true. No, I mean, I don't know about the future once again, but what I'm sure of is hybrid technologies will anyway always be behind native technologies because they do the device and they develop the OS. So it will always be easier to integrate the latest technologies if you use native than if you use hybrid. And with hybrid, you basically run behind the native technologies, right?
yes, of course.
So if you want today to develop an app that uses the 2-year-old technologies, then yeah, maybe hybrid can be a good choice. However, if you want to leverage the latest things that just came within native frameworks, then you have to go for native, right? That's
yeah. And the question that comes next is what level? I mean, is there a threshold for an application to need to be native or not? I mean, some things you do on a mobile don't need to be very fancy just you need basic information, and maybe it's just overkill because it will cost an awful lot to have senior developer both iOS and Android. So, is there some kind of threshold below which it's not does not make sense to go native?
Okay, so if I try to summarize the question is if I do a small application, maybe I can go for hybrid, and if I have a complex application, then maybe I have to go for native. And what is the threshold between simple and complex application, right?
Yes.
Well, okay, my belief with regards to this is if you have a complex application, then you have to go for native, and on this we agree. But if you have a simple application, then it's going to be very simple to develop it on Android and on iOS using native technologies as well, right? And if you want to develop it well using hybrid technologies, I believe it's not a question of you have to hire a developer that knows only the hybrid technologies. Because if you want to develop properly an app, you have to stick to the frameworks and to the OS convention anyway. So you'll have to know the hybrid technologies you use, but you'll also have to know a lot about iOS and Android to be able to deliver a proper result on both platforms, even if you use hybrid technology, right? So that's the reason why I feel that in any case, be it a simple application or a complex one, you always win going with native technologies.
Okay. And last quick point, we definitely forget about Windows Phone.
Right,
Okay.
and that's true. So quick story about Windows Phone. We released our application OneSafe on Windows Phone as well. And that was maybe 2 years ago, I think. So we released the beta version. And at that time, there were not like many applications on the Windows Store. So we managed to be featured quite easily, communicating with Microsoft Teams. And actually, when we were featured, our downloads were going from 1 a day to 3 a day. So it was working well being featured, as in we tripled our downloads, but the number of downloads were very, very, very small. And so we realized that basically there is no market on Windows Phone, at least for the application business. So we just discontinued the Windows Phone application, the Windows Phone version of OneSafe. So that's about Windows Phone. I mean, to me, right now, developing for Windows Phone, if you want to launch an application, it's really not a requirement.
Quick question on instant apps. How it's going to work?
Well, the way it works is basically it's a little bit like when you watch a video on the web. You stream the video. So at any point in time, you download only the little piece of the video that you are currently watching, right? So it's basically streaming application code. So when you open the app, when you click on the link, it will download only the little piece of code that will run the activity that you will open, and that's the way it works. So they managed to almost stream. No, it's going to be your native application. Yeah, it's going to be your native application that will be able to be streamed almost through the web. So you can download only the little piece of code that will run a single activity. And that's the way they do, and that's how they manage to make it that fast.
I basically agree about developing different iOS, but there are tools now that are different. I think that Angular 2 plus native script, when with the same base code, you can generate native applications for Android, for Apple, and for Windows Phone with the same base code. And that's an option that you didn't talk about. And I think for a lot of startups with not a lot of resources, it's very interesting also.
Yeah, so if I understand well what you're saying is there are technologies that allow you to, I mean, you're talking about hybrid technologies, right? So Angular.
No, it's not hybrid. You have the same base code
Uh-huh.
in Angular 2,
Yeah.
and native scripts generate native
Yeah.
application, not hybrid.
Yeah, so those are like what we call code generation framework. So basically they take a single code base and then they derive this code base into two different codes, one that will run on Android, one that will run on iOS, right? And what you're saying is this kind of tool can be very interesting for a startup that doesn't have an extensive budget to spend on app development, right? Okay, so to respond to this and the question of the budget for small startups, I think that's a very good question. To me, once again, what you do when you are, I mean, you want probably as a startup want to develop and release very quickly an MVP, having a very small budget, and that's the reason why you could imagine to go for hybrid technology. But I think once again that's a mistake. That's a mistake because if you want to really quickly release an MVP, then you can pick only one technology. You can pick only iOS or only Android and go for one platform and then test your model. And once you're okay with what you build, then you develop the other side of and actually writing the code is not the longest part. The hardest part when you go for a startup is actually figuring out what your users really want and will really use.
Just to be precise, it's not hybrid, it's native. Native script generate native application for Apple's different app stores. Native, that's not hybrid.
Yeah, but you have a single code base, right? Yeah, so that's code generation tools, and those guys made huge progress really in the latest years, and that's the reason why I'm not sure that within 5 years we won't all use React Native, for example, to build application. I'm not sure about this, but in any case, those frameworks and those code generation tools will always be behind the native frameworks. That's. I mean, there's no other choice. It has to be. It is like that.
Hi. I just wanted to correct you on something. You said you cannot be featured on your app store if you're a hybrid or PhoneGap or whatever app.
Okay.
We have been featured.
Okay.
It's the official des spectacles, so you can check it out.
Okay.
Yeah. And
sorry, on which app store have you been featured?
On the Apple Store.
Okay.
On the
Okay, on iTunes. Okay, using a hybrid application.
Yeah.
So what technologies did you use?
It was Ionic, PhoneGap, Cordova.
Oh yes. Okay, congratulations.
L'officiel des spectacles. And so I also have a question. When you said you cannot be featured on the App Store, do you have information on that? Does Apple or Android take a look at the source code, and if you have a web page and stuff like this, they don't feature you?
No, they don't look at your source code, but they look very closely at your application, and it's very, very difficult with a hybrid application to do something to do something that will really look like a native application. So it seems that you managed to do this, so that's really good. I mean, congratulations.
Thanks to Ionic, I gotta say.
Thanks. Okay. No, but congratulations. The thing is, my point is, it's very, very, very difficult to do this, and you probably spent like a lot of time on your application to make sure it's very polished and to make sure it's very nice, and that's why the guys from Apple, I'm telling you, I'm very surprised about this featuring, because we have very close relationships with Apple, and that's what they tell us. They tell us that basically when one of the reasons why they would feature an application So maybe your service is incredible, and I guess this is the reason why they featured your application, but otherwise, they will always look for applications that leverage the latest technologies, and that's the simplest way to be featured on the App Store. So, for example, as soon as they release Force Touch or Touch ID 2 years ago or 3 years ago, or those kind of things, if you have an app that really uses this new feature, then they will very easily feature you, because you make their device shine, basically. It's as simple as that. So yeah, I'm very surprised. Congratulations. I didn't think this was possible, actually. So you have to give me the name of your application. I will have a look and.
C'était l'officiel des spectacles.
L'officiel spectacle. L'officiel spectacle. Thank you.
Do you know very popular apps that are developed with hybrid technologies?
No. Well, I know one right now.
Okay.
No, Facebook was. Yes. Yeah, Facebook was developed with hybrid technologies. Okay. Okay. No, I don't know any really successful app developed with hybrid technologies.
Hi, I have one question. If we want to launch in native app, is it better to launch it before on Apple Store or Android Store?
It depends. It really depends on who are your customers.
Okay.
Typically, the iOS market is a little bit more high-end, and the Android market is bigger. So then it's your choice. It depends on who you target. But definitely, it's worth doing one after the other. Even if you want to release at the same time, because, I don't know, your app is social or whatever, and people have to interact between Android and iOS guys. It's always interesting when you develop the app to, and this is what we do at Lunabee. So usually the iOS team will start like 2 or 3 weeks before the Android team, or the contrary. But in any case, you start with one version of the app. You try to understand what is the business, how it has to work, how the navigation will be done, and so on. And once you know enough about the way you will do the application, then you start with the other thread. So at the end of the day, writing the code is really not the most time-consuming task when you write an application. First, you really have to create it. And so that's the way we do, and that's a very interesting approach, I think.
Hello. I've got just a quick question about the budget and the cost for choosing between native and hybrid. I'm a native developer.
Mm-hmm.
And the choice for the person who decides is simply on return on investment,
Mm-hmm.
for the budget he has, and the quality of the application he will push to a store. So between the choice between native, which is basically more costly, which is one cost per platform,
Mm-hmm.
and the hybrid should be one cost for all platforms. So
Yeah.
my question is, for this part, which is the decision, what is your argument to say that native is better than hybrid on the short or long term?
Well, the argument is very simple. If you are part of those 80%, if your app falls under this 80%, then your return on investment will be zero, right? If people don't use your app, at the end of the day, you will have developed an app for nothing, right? So you want to be part of those 20% of the app that have good retention rate. And I think that using hybrid technologies is much more difficult to reach these 20%. I can give you an example. I won't tell you the name, but there is a startup at the family who started, doing this exact calculation. They thought like, hey, okay, I want to launch my app, so I'm going to go for a hybrid technology. They developed it, and once the app was developed, they felt like they couldn't release this on the App Store because it really didn't reach their expectations in terms of smoothness, in terms of navigation, in terms of many things. So at the end of the day, what they did is they came to us and they tell us, okay, this is what we did using hybrid technologies. Could you do much better using native technologies? And we actually did much better, and right now the app is on the store. But the story here is that going for hybrid stuff, they basically lose time and lose money. Even if they lose a little bit less money than what they would have lost going for native, they still lose money anyway. Developing a hybrid application that at the end of the day had a zero return on investment for them because they didn't even release it. So I know we say if you launch a product that you are not ashamed of, then it means that you launched too late. But there are limits to this, and I believe that when you launch a product, you still want it to be of quality because you want to convince your users the first time. You just have one chance to do a good first impression. So yeah.
I have another question. You were talking about different frameworks for Android and iOS. Android is material design?
Yes.
Yes, so it's a good idea to create an app for iOS with material design framework.
Okay, so the question is, can I use material design within an iOS application?
Yes.
Yes, you can. And in fact, Google is doing it. But never forget that this is Google. So when they decide to develop an app for iOS, they make it very, very nice, and they spend the money to do it very well, right? But yes, you can. Material design is totally cross-platform. So those are the guidelines released by Google like maybe 2 years ago. And it's totally cross-platform because they use it for web, they use it for Android application, and they also use it for iOS.
Yes, but you were saying that it can be uncomfortable for iOS users.
Yes, this is true. I mean, there are still small details that you wouldn't want to mimic, and there are basic framework components that you don't want to mimic as well. So you don't want a button on Android to look like a button on iOS. Buttons have to look like the framework buttons, okay? And that way you will feel comfortable. As a user, you will understand instantly that this element is a button and is not a text or whatever. So this is what I feel is really important.
Thanks.
Do you happen to know any bilingual developer? You see, from not French-English, but Android.
So the question is, are there any bilingual developers? The answer is yes. The answer is yes, because when you develop a mobile applications, there are still, even between Android and iOS, there are common problems that you always meet, like you want to do time-consuming tasks in the background. You want to make sure that the thread that renders the UI is always free, so that you can have a smooth experience. There are common problems, and there are many people who understand very well those problems and know how to develop in Swift and Java. This is not. I think once you really master one technology, it's much easier. It's exactly like a language. If you already speak 4 languages, then it's very easy to learn a 5th one. Okay. So yes, there are bilingual developers. We have bilingual developers at Lunabee, but then people will always have a preference for one platform or the others. So there are the Android aficionados who wants. Yes, at the same time it's difficult, yes. Yeah. Usually bilingual developers will have learned will have mastered first one technology, and then they will have learned the other one.
Okay.
That's the way it works.
And another question, to drive down the cost of having two sets of development, are there known ways of offloading some of the complexity to the server side?
Yeah.
So to keep the thinnest part on the...
Yes, exactly. And that's a very good point. I didn't mention it, but I should have, really, and thank you. Usually when you develop an app, the app is actually only the front end of your service, and you have a back end. And there are very powerful tools to develop your backend. We extensively used parse until a few months ago. So yes, usually you will have a lot of your business logic that runs on the backend of your application, so that the app is only the front end and just runs the UI stuff that are specific to the OS you are running your app on. Okay, so yeah, that's another argument in favor of you don't have to write all your code twice. Actually, if you go for native technologies, because a lot of your business logic will be on your backend, developed with your own backend technology, whatever it is.
Which backend technology do you use now?
Well, okay, we worked with many different backend technologies, but one of our favorites is still parse, but the open source version of parse that we host on AWS, on Amazon Web Service. So it's basically Node.js and MongoDB,
Thank you.
the technologies behind parse. Sorry? No, we don't do Ruby on Rails. But we are not specialists of back-end technologies. We are specialists of front-end and mobile applications. So with many of our customers, actually, they have their back-end or someone else is developing the back-end, and we just plug in using the API, and we develop the front-end side of it. Okay? Thank you very much.